Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin's Spring into Action show. I'm your host, Reverend Chris, and our topic today is welcoming. Now, let's meet our panel and Spring into Action leadership team. She's the chair of the Social Action Council, chair of our Spring into Action team, and a member of the Transformation Through Service team, Wendy Erisman. He's a co-facilitator of our White Allies for Racial Equity group, a high school class advisor, our social justice outreach coordinator, and a member of our board of trustees, Scott Butki. Co-chair of our Alphabet Soup group, an usher and a member of our People of Color group, Tomas Medina. Chair of our Inside Amigos immigration rights groups and a member of the Austin Sanctuary Network, as well as a member of the board of our Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, Peggy Morton. Besides serving on our Spring into Action team, he helps out in our faith development activities and classes and is known to many of our children as Zoe's dad. Joe Milam-Kast. Now, let's jump right into our first question, which is for you, Wendy. Could you please tell us a little about how welcoming came to be the topic for this year's Spring into Action and some of the kinds of events related to it that have been going on this past month?
As many of you know, Spring into Action is something we do every April. We pick a theme, and then we ask church ministries to sponsor different kinds of events, social events, educational events, volunteer events, that will help us explore that particular theme. This year our theme is welcoming, and it really came about because most of us on the committee were in an RE class last year called Living the Welcoming Congregation. And this was primarily about welcoming LGBT individuals into our church community, but we really liked the approach and thought it could be spread out to lots of different people and really apply to how we are welcoming as a church altogether. We like the fact that it focused on being welcoming as individuals, being welcoming as a congregation, and being welcoming as a community. So we had lots of church groups participate, we had workshops, public affairs forums, book groups, and last night a really wonderful welcoming potluck dinner for our new members.
Terrific. Thank you, Wendy. That sounds like some really great events have been happening. Peggy, I understand you had a few surprises come up for you during our welcoming activities. Can you tell us about those?
Gladly. Yes, I definitely did. Early on, actually, the first event we had was a public affairs forum where we invited 3 people of color to take part in a panel. And we asked them to discuss the idea of, is Austin a welcoming city? And personally, I was blown away. I probably should have known this, but I didn't realize the deep disparity that people of color face in accessing health care, particularly moms of color who, well, for one thing, the panelist who talked to us was a midwife named Paola Rojas. And Paola told us that Austin has a big percentage of midwives here and compared to other major cities, and I thought that sounded like a good thing until I learned that it's because people can't afford to have their babies in hospitals. And it actually gets even worse for people who are poor enough to be on Medicaid, because when they're on Medicaid and they go to a hospital in Austin, particularly if they are poor, a person of color, they are more likely to be given or have a cesarean birth when it's unnecessary. And the reason for this is that the hospital is reimbursed only $500 when they perform a vaginal birth that can take as much as 20 hours of time. But they get $4,500 when they do a cesarean birth. So, is that welcoming? I don't think so. It disgusts me to realize that they're doing these procedures for convenience and putting profit over people. And so the good news is that Paola works with Mama Sana Healthcare Clinic in East Austin, and they have been doing a lot. In fact, all three of those panelists had been a part of a panel that worked with getting the new educational hospital going and talking to them about what to do, how we can be more friendly to people of color. Now, on another note, of course, that speaks to what our city's doing, but I had a personal concern, and I was super excited when I saw the calendar that they put together, and our UU youth, our high schoolers, actually presented a class on how to be more welcoming to our LGBT community. And what had happened to me, I had felt sort of, I definitely, well, let me get into it. I had felt very awkward. I was in a situation one time, I teach civil disobedience classes to big groups of people, and we break up.
Not you, Peggy.
Not me. But we break up into smaller groups, and so we're talking to people, and I have experienced, there was a gender fluid person there, and this is somewhat new to me, and I wasn't sure if this person was a he or a she. And so basically this person had talked a little bit in the small group, and then I referred back to the person, and I kind of stopped, and I used the they, because I'd been around the First UU Church enough to know that we can use the they pronoun, but I hadn't done that before. And then I felt bad. It's like, oh wait, how does this person feel about it? What am I doing? And it's like, okay, stay focused on what I'm doing. So I was excited to have the opportunity to specifically talk to the youth about this. And they told me I did the exact perfect thing. It's becoming quite commonplace to use the they pronoun. And I have to admit, it's still a little awkward for me as a retired writing teacher to use a plural pronoun for an individual. But I realize, I can do this. We all can do this. Another thing, this was something I was already aware of, but it was so much fun to listen to the youth teach us. And that is, I have several trans friends who have met in this church, and some of them I knew before they transitioned. And to me, it's just natural to respect anyone, to refer to them as the gender that they identify with. But I have heard some friends in the church say, oh, no, that person, not that, that's that. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're UUs. What about this affirming the worth and dignity of everyone? And so anyway, those were a couple of lessons, and it was quite an honor for me to learn from our youth. I think that's something that we all could open up to.
Terrific. Thank you, Peggy. How about you, Zoe's dad? What's something that surprised you about welcoming during this year's Spring into Action?
I'm so going to have to get my name tag changed.
And now you can get a pronoun of your choice to put on your name tag.
There we go. I think the biggest thing that was a very pleasant surprise to me is the amount of response and depth that we were able to get this year for Spring into Action. As Wendy mentioned earlier, this kind of all started out of an RE class last year, and in that year's time, we've been able to reach out to pretty much every corner and group here at the church to invite participation. We've had tremendous success in that regard. I too remember when Wendy showed us the calendar for the first time, just being astounded at the number of events that were going on this month, and through the support of the entire church community, the ministerial team, the youth, as Peggy mentioned, all the groups that sponsor an event, I think that it really got the message of welcoming and how we as individuals and a congregation can deal with welcoming in a wide variety of areas, and it was really great to see.
Terrific. Thank you, Joe. That sounds like some great learning's been going on. Scott, how about you? What are some things you and others have learned?
I learned about how the UUA is involved with the United Nations. I had no idea that was the case, and I thought it was great. A lot of it is work trying to reduce and stem the amount of prejudice against women, people of color, the LGBT throughout the UN. I also learned through some of the events we did about racism just how much energy and excitement people have in our groups that are wanting to do more and hopefully having others joining us.
Terrific. Thank you, Scott. And how about you, Tomas? What were some of your takeaways?
I would say I had three main takeaways from my participation in the Spring into Action activities this month. The first would be that welcoming is really all about the person being welcomed, not the welcomer. And what I mean by that is that we need to be sensitive to how people like to be welcomed. And this really came to mind when I spoke to a few people of color about their experiences here. And they had very different perspectives. And one woman said that when she's in House and Hall, she's approached by so many people and asked so many questions that she feels not welcomed but barraged and a little besieged. On the other hand, another woman says that when she's in House and Hall, she feels a little bit like people are avoiding her and don't want to speak to her. So you really have to be sensitive to what someone's feelings are about how to be welcomed. Another sort of related insight was that welcoming can be a bit of a delicate balance. And what I mean by that is how I came to this, how this idea came to me was attending the Public Affairs Forum that Anna Wynn presented at. She's the president of PFLAG Austin, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gay People, and she's a transgender woman. And she was saying that as a way for non-LGBTQ folks to make people feel welcome, the LGBTQ community feel welcome when, as they come out, is to ask questions, right? Because you want to understand where your loved ones are coming from and support them. On the other hand, some questions are just not appropriate to ask. And you need to be sensitive when asking a question. You might ask yourself, is this a question that I would feel comfortable answering? And is this a question that I would feel comfortable asking somebody that may not be part of this community? And the third thing I came to have an insight into occurred when I was part of an activity which was cleaning the Out Youth House. The Out Youth House is the drop-in center for gay and lesbian youth here in Austin. And with several other members of the congregation, we spent an evening cleaning the house. And as I was cleaning, I remembered that when I invite people to my house, one of the first things I do is make sure my house is clean and in order so that when they come, they feel welcome. And what that says to me is that we need to not just talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. So we can't just say welcome to people from diverse backgrounds. We have to do the preparatory work to make sure that when they show up, they do actually feel welcomed. And I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I know that we're starting to have those discussions, and I'm glad about that. And I know we're not having it just here in our congregation, but also in the greater UU community. So that gives me hope.
Great, terrific insights. Thank you, Tomas. Scott, I want to follow up with you, especially related to the complications that Thomas was just talking about. Do you think the issues tackled this month are ones that can be easily and quickly resolved, or will it take more time?
Well, the work I'm most focused on doing is the anti-racism work, and that's not going to finish. We're not going to fix that in a month or a year. I mean, we're talking about centuries we're trying to turn around here. Now that we have a core group who has learned a lot, we're deciding we need to get others from the church to help us with the dealing with our whiteness, with our privilege, etc. We can't just change this on its own. So in addition to time, we need more people, both with also, both events we had less than 10 people at some of our events. So we need more participation if we really support changing things around here as far as racism, as far as welcoming. We need more buy-in.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Scott. I want to ask one more question of the panel and let whoever would like to take this one take it. And then I think we have a time for a couple of questions from our sanctuary audience. I wonder if one of you could talk about, what do you think the difference between being welcoming and never making anyone uncomfortable might be?
I'd be happy to speak to that, Chris. I do think that there's a difference between feeling welcomed and feeling comfortable. And what I really think about is when I go to holiday dinners with my relatives, I feel welcomed. I know they want me there. I know they're happy to see me. At the same time, dinner conversation might not always be entirely comfortable. Sometimes people will ask tough questions. Sometimes we'll disagree about things. But at the end of the day, we do love each other, and we will be happy to see each other the next time we get together. So I think that with a church community, it's similar. I think that being welcoming means wanting to have people here. But I think that part of what we do as a Unitarian Universalist church is also challenge each other to think about difficult issues. And so I hope that we don't assume that welcoming always means being comfortable.
And I wanted to speak to that as well. To me, it's like the difference between embracing others completely, no matter what differences are, and tolerating others. One of them is doing our minimum, and one of them is being real.
Anyone else? All right, so I think I will open it up and see if anybody would like to ask a question. Well, there's someone right here. Here is a microphone, and here is your question.
I'm Carolyn, and I want to thank the panel so much for all the work that you've done on Spring into Action. We really appreciate you. So the question is, after all the Spring into Action activities this month, how would you define welcoming, and how has that changed for you over the month?
Great question, Carolyn. For me, having been involved with social action quite a bit, I stand at the table in the gallery, and I'm used to talking to people, and I just think it comes naturally, and of course I'm being welcoming. But with this month of being very intentional about welcoming, I had to confront what an extrovert I am. And sometimes I can be quite overbearing, particularly to introverts. And if you haven't noticed, this denomination definitely attracts a majority of introverts. And so it's become almost sacred to me to really take the time to step back and listen to people. And instead of flying off the, oh, we have this going on and this going on, you could do this, is I really appreciate sitting back and asking people, what brought you to this church? And sometimes actually being able to connect them to different projects that can help continue their growth here.
I had a lot of the standard, I guess you could call them, ideas about welcoming before the class and before the Spring into Action. Greeting people, making sure they felt comfortable, knew where everything was. I think the way that changed for me the most this month was an awareness of the larger community and even the space itself. And what I mean is that our individual welcoming efforts reflect and become a part of the church community as a whole. And where we as individuals might fumble or experience some of the challenges that we've talked about here today, I think we have to remember that we're representing a larger community, and that community has its own sense of welcoming. One of the things that very much surprised me last night at our potluck was a lot of the older members that were there were talking about how they weren't talked to. No one said anything to them when they first walked through House and Hall, and yet there was something about the community as a whole and the space, the sacred space, that was welcoming enough that they came back, they prospered, and I think it's a great thing that the space itself can be welcoming as well.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm having this intuition that this person right here wants the microphone so she can ask this question.
Thank you, Reverend Chris. This is a question I've been thinking about for some time. How would you describe being welcoming as a spiritual value or practice?
That's a great question. So I found that as I was going through this month's activities of Spring Awakening and being welcoming, that being welcoming is really something that you do with intention, as Peggy was mentioning. And for me, a spiritual practice is something that you do with intention on a regular and repeated basis. in order to feel connected to something bigger than yourself. And when we welcome someone, we make them feel like they are valuable and that what they bring to the table is important and appreciated. And to me, that's something bigger than me. So if I practice being welcoming on a regular basis, for me, I consider that a spiritual practice. And I think something to remember with any spiritual practice, including welcoming, is that I'm never going to be perfect at it. And especially at welcoming, that can sometimes be a little tricky. We might sometimes fumble and get it wrong, and we need to realize that the reason we got it wrong is because we tried. We were practicing. And so when we practice and we fail, we just get right back on our welcoming horse and keep and keep on welcoming.
Thank you, Tomas, and thank you all for this invaluable learning. I also want to add my thanks to you again for leading our Spring into Action campaign this year. Terrific work. As you have just heard, becoming more and more welcoming is a part of our spiritual journey here at First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. We've begun a great conversation that we will continue into our future. If you happen to be visiting with us today, we'd love to hear from you about your experiences with this church so far, if you're comfortable sharing them with me or one of the members of our panel. It's great that we've begun this conversation because it means that we, each of you, really want this to be a welcoming place where so many might join us in that free search for truth, beauty, and meaning in which we are engaged. May we walk that journey together in the ways of love. May we invite more and more folks of goodwill to join us in that, our sacred journey.